Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today's video is going to be another Booktube SFF Awards Babbles topic. And this week's topic is favorite science fiction and fantasy in other media. This is also a crossover topic with Top 5 Wednesday, I believe, but I am not going to limit myself to just a top 5 because I don't feel like it. I feel a little strange doing this topic, however, because I don't generally consume entertainment media outside of books, so this is a bit of a challenge. I'm not sure that many things I'm going to talk about today would be new to most people who enjoy science fiction and fantasy, but you know, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I have 4 categories. The first one is television series. I'll start with the oldest television series first. I am definitely a fan of Star Trek rather than Star Wars. I never really got into Star Wars, but Star Trek is definitely more my jam. I particularly love The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I have seen all of Voyager, I've seen half of Enterprise, and a little bit of the original series, but for me, Star Trek is The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Though I still haven't seen the last season of Deep Space Nine. I keep saying I'm going to and then I don't. Anyway, The Next Generation, I think in particular, embodies the Star Trek ideals that I most appreciate. That's what I compare all other Star Trek stories to. Picard is my captain. Deep Space Nine, I think, really impressed me because it was just a different setting, being on a space station, and it really felt much darker in tone than the other series did, so that's where my heart lies. I am also a huge fan of Firefly, which will surprise absolutely no one. I probably don't need to talk about this much because I know Firefly is really, really well loved by a lot of people in the community, but yeah. I will say that I am much more of a fan of the original only season rather than Serenity the movie, which I've seen a couple of times and I just don't like as much as the TV episodes. Another favorite from way back in the day is Eureka, and tell me if you've heard of this series and if you watched it. I consumed all of Eureka when I was in my university TV binge phase, when I basically wasn't reading for pleasure, I was just watching lots of television shows, and I loved Eureka. It is comedic science fiction, contemporary, I guess, about a new sheriff in a town called Eureka where basically a bunch of mad scientists live. And it starts off as kind of wacky and humorous and the adventures of the normal guy in the town of crazy scientists. But later on in like the last couple of seasons, there were some, I think, darker shifts, especially a timeline change, and it maintained some of that humor, but it was definitely doing darker things. I think it kind of revitalized the last couple of seasons. I was really sad to see it end, actually, because I think it was getting really great in the latter half of its run, but anyway, I really need to rewatch it. I'm always forgetting that this exists and how much I loved it, and then I find my DVDs again, I'm like, I should rewatch the entire thing because I loved it so much. And finally, my last 2 are more recent favorites. The first one is Orphan Black. This is probably my favorite concluded science fiction series in a long time. Orphan Black is about a woman who discovers that she is a clone. She meets her other clone sisters and they kind of fight back against a corporation that made them and is experimenting with them and kind of wants to continue controlling their lives. There's a lot more to it than that, but I particularly enjoy the actress Tatiana Maslany's performance. She plays all of the clones herself, and I think she did actually win an Emmy eventually, which was really well deserved. I watched this for her in particular, so I really love it. This recently concluded with the 5th season, which I'm almost done watching, and I'll be really sad when it's finally over. And the last favorite science fiction television series I want to mention is The Expanse, which is still currently airing. I think the 3rd season is about to start in a couple of weeks too, which I'm really excited about. This is an adaptation of the Expanse space opera novels by James S.A. Corey. I really enjoy this. I enjoy it just on its own, but also when I compare it to the books, it's really good. It might even be a little bit better than the books, I think. But basically, I feel like this is just a story that works really well on television, and it's been a very high quality production, which I really like. It's been a while since the Sci-Fi Channel had a really good science fiction hit, I think. Moving on now to my miniseries and movies category. My first pick in this one is Children of Dune, the miniseries adaptation by the Sci-Fi Channel. This is probably like a decade old at this point. I have seen the first miniseries that adapted Dune, and Children of Dune is the adaptation of Dune Messiah and Children of Dune, which are the second and third books in the Dune Chronicles by Frank Herbert. I've mentioned this recently because I finally read the books that it's based on, and I can say that I vastly prefer the adaptation's changing of the story and stuff. They fixed or left out some of the elements in the books that I most disliked, but for whatever reason, I was obsessed with this miniseries when I was a teenager. I watched it repeatedly. I also listened to the soundtrack by Brian Tyler like ad nauseum, to the extent that I don't even listen to it much today because I got so sick of it, but yeah. I really enjoy this. Another all-time favorite is Hogfather, which is the adaptation of the Discworld novel of the same name. This is the Discworld Christmas story, and I tend to watch it every year at Christmas time. It's a little bizarre to have this as my favorite Christmas movie, but whatever. This is about how Hogfather, aka Santa Claus, is being targeted for assassination by somebody who's trying to take out the gods, basically, and the anthropomorphic personification of death steps in to perform the Hogfather's duties on Hog's Watch night or Christmas Eve. I love it. I love the book, which I reread a little while ago, and I noticed how a lot of it was lifted verbatim and used in the adaptation. I've seen other adaptations of Discworld books like Going Postal and The Color of Magic, and none of them felt quite as much like Discworld as Hogfather does, so I will mention briefly that the Lord of the Rings movies are like my favorite movies of all time. I've watched them many times, not since 2012 or 2013 though, so I'm due for a rewatch, but I don't need to say much more about this because they are favorites for many people. Most people have seen them, I think. My most recent favorite science fiction movie is Arrival. What is it with me and adaptations on this list? Like, I thought I would have some original stories, but nope, not really. Arrival is based on the Ted Chiang novella, The Story of Your Life, which happens to be my favorite thing by Ted Chiang, and I have very deep personal feelings about this story. And I feel like Arrival is a good movie on its own, just a really solid movie, but also it was a good adaptation. It does change things from the original story, but it maintains the emotional core that was most important to me from the source material. That's probably why I like it so much. Let me slide in a very small category here for podcasts. I love Welcome to Night Vale, and to date it's the only storytelling podcast that I've really become invested in. I keep trying other ones and I just don't care that much about them, and I go back to listening to Welcome to Night Vale. This is really popular and very well known, so I won't talk that much about what it is, but yeah, I love it. And I'm most fond of the actual podcast episodes. I do like a lot of the tie-in material, like the novels that have been coming out, but for me, Welcome to Night Vale is the podcast with Cecil speaking on the radio to everybody. And my last category is music. These are basically soundtracks and scores to science fiction and fantasy movies and television series. I wasn't sure if this really counted as its own category or science fiction and fantasy and other media, but I decided to include it because it's a huge part of how I re-experience a lot of my favorite SFF and other media. I don't listen to music that much, but when I do, I tend to listen to soundtracks and scores almost exclusively. I'm going to start with my two all-time favorite soundtracks that I've been listening to for the most time. They are definitely all-time favorites, and I think they will continue to be for many years to come. The first one is, unsurprisingly, the Lord of the Rings scores by Howard Shore. I started off listening to the original soundtracks released on CD, but these days I tend to listen to the extended editions, which are much, much longer. I've never managed to buy them in physical form because they're basically out of print and unavailable by the time that I learned they existed, but I have collected them all in digital format over the years through various means. These are some of the best scores ever, in my opinion. I don't know that much about scores and everything, but I feel like maybe Howard Shore raised the bar somewhat for music in science fiction and fantasy movies with these. My second favorite all-time soundtracks are Bear McCreary's scores for seasons 1 through 4 of Battlestar Galactica, the reimagined version. I still remember the first time I heard the taiko drums. It's awesome. Bear McCreary is probably the only composer that I actually follow his work. I periodically look up what he's been doing and I give it a listen because so much of his stuff I've really enjoyed. I think he also did the music for the last couple seasons of Eureka, and I actually noticed that and was like, I'm pretty sure that Bear McCreary is doing the music now. So yeah, BSG's music is amazing. I love so many of the different tracks. It's great. I only have one other thing to mention in this category right now because it is my current favorite. I'm listening to it on repeat, and that is Hans Zimmer's score for Interstellar. This is actually kind of a rediscovery for me because I did watch the movie in theaters when it came out in 2014, and I immediately went out and started listening to the music after that because it was really awesome. But in the last couple of months, I rediscovered it on YouTube with the extended edition, or they call it like a director's cut of the music or something, and it contains some pieces that were my favorite bits from the movie that weren't in the original release of the score. Tracks like No Time to Spare, for example, like my favorite bit from the entire score. So I've been listening to this so much recently. It features a lot of really intense organ music, which is not something I've ever heard in any of Hans Zimmer's other scores, but I really happen to like it here, so that is my current favorite. And that is pretty much it for my favorite science fiction and fantasy in other media outside of books, though a lot of them are adaptations of books. So if any of these are your favorites as well, do let me know. And if, based upon this list, you have any recommendations for me, also let me know, because sometimes I do push myself to enjoy things outside of books and I'm never quite sure where to look. I will link the Goodreads group for the Booktube SFF Awards and the thread for this particular topic in the description down below, so you can go find other people who are talking about this and probably have more favorites in other media to talk about than I did. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.